Alarms sounded, alerting the medical staff of an emergency. They all immediately began to strap on all their gear and race towards the corridor. Normally, this is where there's only worry and dread, as they read the words deep laceration with excessive hemorrhaging come across their HUD. This means by the time they arrive, the patient is most likely already bled out. If they're lucky, they can perform surgery to save the patient if they're very lucky. Depending on the patient, this could mean cauterizing the wound chemically or thermally, a process that makes most species die of shock and others simply faint, even if they're just looking on. They could seal the wound with an adhesive and pray that the patient doesn't have too much blood loss already. Even then, surgery will be required to repair most species. In the worst and most common case, the patient is given a dose of painkillers. This is one part of the job they hate, as the medics will be unable to save the patient, and all they can do is lessen the pain as the patient goes away. This is why there's normally dread. Yet this time, they're actually excited, almost giddy at the idea of working on the new species known as human. They knew that a group had arrived in the station and started an establishment about 3 months ago. An establishment that catered to most forms of dopamine spikes, especially when it comes to chemical induction. However, most believe that an establishment like this, just like all the others, would have some sort of emergency long before 3 months. They expected 3 hours. Yet now, the establishment was well received by everybody. But everyone knows that such an establishment is prone to excessive, addictive, and violent personnel. As they traveled to the establishment, they all listened to what they might find. There was reports coming in of a blue chew getting too aggressive with the human hostess. Apparently, he attempted to slide his limp tentacle up her outfit, probably believing that this was something that he was allowed to do. However, in response, the hostess apparently struck him in the head with a large glass mug of cocoa, which is the strongest intoxicant for a blue chew. The striking was strong enough that the creature's tentacles stopped going up her leg as the entire creature went limp. Initial reports started coming in indicating a same code word, deadwood, that kept flashing in an amber color. This was a code that meant most likely their patient was already deceased. A few others actually tried to protest, and the humans ended up in a brawl with all the patrons inside their own bar. There were reports of missing limbs, broken carapaces, decapitation, impact injuries of all sorts, and of course a bunch of lacerations. This is to be expected as there are a lot of insectoids and a lot of other creatures that tend to impact quite hard. The medical staff entered the establishment expecting something bad, and they were not disappointed. Scattered across the floor were bodies of reptilians, insectoids, mammalians, amphibians, and even a few avian species, most of which were not moving, but a few just sat there and groaned. Most just had impact wounds, but a few looked as though they had been torn apart. Some are missing limbs with blood seeping all over the floor. One mammalian called it dinklage, which is a small carnivorous species that looked like a bipedal reptile that looked like it had its head torn partially off, as the neck was still mostly there, as the only thing still holding the head on was a few tendons and a lot of blood all over the floor. There was also the initial blue chew that was still on the ground with part of its head smashed in completely. There was gray matter seeping out the side, simply sludging its way down to the floor, meeting all the blood, landing with the occasional slap, slop, and gushing. The place looked like a war zone, but that was not the most horrific part. Next to the bar, The humans nursed their injuries, yet not a single one of them seemed to be dying at this point. Cold items were being placed on impact wounds, as a few of them seemed to stretch and groan trying to deal with the impacts. One human stuck his entire hand inside the ice bin, and then you simply saw a full relief on his face, as though all the pain that was in his hand was simply leaving. The staff had heard about this, how humans can deal with injuries with cold, but they didn't have time. They had other patients. As the staff got to work on all those still groaning on the floor, they noticed a human over at the bar simply reach out, and there seemed to be messing with a needle and thread. They then poured a glass of ethyl alcohol, dropped the needle and thread inside, and seemed to move it around just a little bit. Then they raised their other arm, placing it right on the bar. That's when the medical staff noticed a very large laceration down the arm, blood still oozing out of the large room. The medical staff was still busy with the others, but they all looked in horror as the human proceeded to pour the alcohol up, dose it right down the arm, making it seemingly flinch ever so slightly, then reaching into the small glass that had the needle and thread, pull it out, and proceeded to sew itself up. This human hardly seemed to feel the pain as it moved methodically, closing the wound as it had an 8-inch long gash all the way down its arm. The other humans were busy with their own injuries, so this human just continued, never asking for help, just focused on what they were doing. When they were done, the humans seemed to move with practiced precision as they tied the end of the string, pulling it just tight enough where it would stay closed, reached down and bit the remaining string off. Without hesitation, the human then put the needle down, picked up the bottle again, and then took a large drink and then poured some over the freshly closed wound. This would be the first time this human grimaced in pain, trying not to flinch. Then the human placed a towel over it and carried on like nothing had happened. The medical staff was amazed and tried to save those that had been injured. They were once again surprised that the humans, as after treating their own wounds, they began to treat the others with absolute skill and precision, so much so that you would think that they were on the station's medical staff. As everything is settling down, the bodies are removed. Those who needed medical help were taken to the medical bays so they could be put in the regeneration pods. Yet before leaving, an avian medical staff member went over and asked to check on the human that was next to the bar. The human agreed to this, moved the towel away that they had tied on, and showed the stitches without hesitation. These stitches were clean and obviously holding. The rest of the medical staff, now that they were free, came over to look, and one of them asked, "How can you perform surgery on yourself?" The human was confused. "Surgery? This is just basic first aid." The avian widened its eyes and looked and said, "How can you call it that?" The human simply replied, "It wasn't deep." That is when they all look astonished as they examine it closer. The avian then says, What did this? What caused this injury?" The human said, "Oh, when that blue chew tried to stick his pathetic little tentacle up my skirt, I hit him with the beer stein. I'm pretty sure I killed him. His mate, maybe, I guess, immediately got up. He was mad, broke a bottle, and swung it at me. I held up my arm to protect myself, and this is what happened." The realization began to sink into the medical staff. This was the supposed weaker sex of the humans, and they were this badass? In that moment, half of the medical staff froze in fear. They looked at her, they looked at the wound, and their eyes barely moved as they took in the entire situation. A quarter of the medical staff actually couldn't stand up anymore and fell onto their haunches or had to reach over to a chair and sit down. Their legs were just turning into jelly. The last quarter simply fainted at this realization. Seeing this, the other humans looked at her with confusion, and the boss yelled, "What the hell did you just do?" The female at the bar decided that she would put one hand on her hip and another finger to the side of her lips and said, "I just showed them how much of a knockout I am." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on this short and hopefully fun story. Now before I go, I need to say that today's winner is Erica Gem, with Tiffany Stewart coming in really close second. I also need to send out a great big thank you to the supporters of this channel, and those are Prozac and Pancakes, Sir, SS Demon, MTF Guard, Erica Gem, Guardian Sage, Brian Kemp, The Lockeen, Joseph Blush, and Douglas Scarborough. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.